All right. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Security Boulevard webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I am just so excited to have some great folks on this panel webinar today. It's going to be a great discussion, but before we get things kicked off, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the Security Boulevard webinar, or website, so you'll be able to find it there. And we are taking questions from the audience. Hopefully, we'll have enough time to go through those audience questions. But if you have a question for any of our panelists during today's webinar, please go ahead and use the question and answer tab on your screen. You can also use the chat tab if you prefer, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. I'm also going to be sending out a polling question before we get started with our conversation. I'll just leave the polling question up throughout the webinar, and hopefully we'll have enough time near the end to take a look at the results and see what you guys are thinking about cybersecurity and remote work. And finally, before the end of today's webinar, we will be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, we've got a lot to talk about. Today's webinar is security challenges and opportunities of remote work, and what a relevant topic we have for you today. I'm just thrilled that we have such an esteemed panel of guests today joining me for what is sure to be a really interesting conversation, and hopefully with a lot of takeaways for your organization. To start things off, we have Pete Gare, who is a cyber consultant, cyber resilience solutions marketing at Dell Technologies. Hi, Pete. Thanks so much for joining me today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Charlene. Thanks for having me. Hi.
Next up, we have Jeffrey Martin, who is Associate VP of Product Management at WhiteSource. Jeffrey, glad to see you. How are you?
Doing great. Good to be here.
Good, good, good. Next up, we have Travis Gary, who is sorry, I think that's me. Apologies for that. I apologize. Let's see. Travis Gary, who's Business Operations Manager at Teleport. Travis, thanks so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, great, great. And next up, we have Justin Crawford, who's Vice President of Engineering and Technology at Echo. Justin, thank you also for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
All right. And finally, last but certainly not least, we have Kausik, who is Guruswamy, who is the CTO of Menlo Security. Kausik, thanks for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great, great, great. So we have, as I said, a really, really interesting panel of panelists talking about cybersecurity and remote work. And we're all, it's something that a lot of everybody actually probably has had a conversation about at one time or another in their organization since the start of the pandemic. And definitely it's become more top of mind as organizations are kind of, I kind of call it the COVID hangover. After everybody kind of rushed to work from home at the onset of the pandemic, a lot of organizations obviously were not really thinking as much about cybersecurity as perhaps they should have been. And so now kind of we're into phase 2, and as organizations are perhaps opening up or working in a more hybrid environment, or they've opened up and then they've sent their employees back home. Definitely we've been seeing some issues regarding cybersecurity and possibly even data breaches in the organization. So what we're hoping to do today is have a conversation about what organizations have seen so far what are maybe perhaps some of the characteristics of organizations that have fared better when it comes to cybersecurity than others, and then taking a look at some of the biggest opportunities that organizations have to come to from a cybersecurity perspective that maybe a way to make hay, if you will, during the pandemic to maybe improve their cybersecurity posture or somehow improve their cybersecurity tools and technologies or whatever it is that's going to help them improve their cybersecurity posture overall. Before we actually get started, because I do want to ask all of our panelists just to tell us a little bit about themselves, their background, and tell us about their company as well. I do want to push out a polling question to the audience, and I'm going to leave it there available for folks to go ahead and make their choice. It's in the polling tab there, so you can go ahead and make your choice at any time. I'm going to leave it up during the webinar, so whenever you want to go ahead and take part, that's great. But let's real quick start by having everybody introduce themselves. Pete, I'm going to start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your company, all that good stuff.
Sure, Charlene. Thank you very much. So hi, Pete Gare again. Greetings from Boston, Massachusetts today. I hope you're all doing well. So I work for Dell Technologies, and specifically I lead marketing and go-to-market efforts for some of our cyber and security solutions. I've been in the IT industry about 25 years. I tend to come from the data protection and infrastructure side, and I'm often working with customers sort of at the intersection of business and technology. So I tend to talk to a lot of business leaders and try to figure out the best ways for business and IT to bring them both to the table, especially around security. Thank you. Happy
Excellent.
to be here.
All right. Thank you, Pete. Jeffrey, tell us a little bit about yourself, even though you are no stranger to our webinars.
I'm also from Boston. So Pete and I are practically neighbors. Boston's kind of big. But, so I'm a VP of product over at WhiteSource, and what we specialize in is open source risk management, specifically around security vulnerabilities, because let's face it, for the most part, everybody's software is built predominantly off of open source with relatively little proprietary code, and open source is public vulnerability data. So we specialize in helping people remediate those vulnerabilities.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeffrey. Travis, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Travis Gary, and I'm a business operations manager here at Teleport. Teleport, we help engineers unify access for SSH to your servers, Kubernetes clusters, web applications, and databases. And joining Teleport, I guess that was over a year ago now, was a no-brainer for me, coming from Airbnb and working on managing a systems operations team where we had hundreds and hundreds of systems. Realized this is a very hard problem to solve. So when I saw us Teleport is, the goal is to make this easy. I'm like, sign me up. Love to help solve that problem for companies.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Travis. Justin, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Sure, thank you. So my name is Justin Crawford. I'm a VP of engineering for Echo. Here at Echo, we work to secure primarily contact centers from different types of threats and also from exposing certain information. So if you think of PCI compliance and descoping to PII, and with the introduction of GDPR and now the DCA and those types of things, contact centers have a unique challenge ahead of them for trying to secure that kind of data that they're exposed to. And so our solutions help them do that effectively for themselves and their customers.
Excellent. All right, great. And Kaushik, please tell us about yourself and about Menlo Security.
Thanks, Charlene. My name is Kaushik. I'm CTO at Menlo Security. Menlo, we've been in the business for about 8 years now, and we've built this massive cloud security platform in use by 8 out of the 10 banks in the world, 4 out of the 5 credit card companies, and most recently, U.S. Department of Defense, with all of 3.5 million personnel are essentially starting to use our platform in the cloud. And the unique thing that we do is what we call isolation-powered cloud security platform, where we actually offer 100% guarantee against web and email based threats, which is kind of unique in the security because security is so far has been around a lot of FUD selling. And I've been in this industry for probably 20 years, I would say. A little bit of a timer, yeah.
All right, then. Well, I love the fact that we have such a wide variety of panelists on today's presentation webinar, because it's great to have vendors and customers and analysts and just in so many different areas. This panelist, we've got folks in the contact center industry, we've got folks in the security industry, we got Teleport, who's kind of doing the SSH thing. So, and Dell, obviously Dell is, you guys are pretty much everywhere. So it's going to be a great conversation, I can tell. So let's go ahead and get that kicked off. Love to hear, as I said before we started, want to make sure that everybody has a place at the table, if you will. So please feel free to just join into the conversation at any time. And that also goes for the audience. So if you have a comment or a question, as I said before, just use your chat box, use your question and answer panel, and join in on the conversation as well. Want to kind of kick off with the just kind of setting the table, if you will, when we're talking about security challenges and opportunities of remote work. Obviously, this has been an ongoing issue for the past 9 months or so since the onset of the pandemic. And as I said before, a lot of companies really weren't considering security as in their efforts to get their employees working remotely and being effective and efficient and productive. So, what do you guys think, or what have you guys seen as some of kind of the biggest security issues that maybe have kind of come out of the woodwork, if you will, whether it's a data breach or whether it's a misconfigurations that have kind of maybe we found out about post remote work or during remote work, or even maybe some of the technologies or tools that are being used now for remote work that maybe are not so secure. But Kaushik, why don't we start with you? I'd love to hear what your organization is seeing in relation to kind of some of the security issues that have cropped up since the pandemic.
So even pre-COVID, there was a big push to kind of move security into the cloud. But really the IT changes around COVID were sort of fourfold. One was companies that were kind of sort of dabbling into cloud were forced to go to 100% cloud in terms of SaaS adoption and stuff like that. And we went from trusted device to pretty much any device that you can get on a Zoom call. I've been on panels where people are like, I couldn't get my corporate laptop to work, so I'm going to borrow my kid's iPad to jump on the Zoom call. And then we went from fence perimeters to absolutely no perimeter. What does that even mean anyways? And the last one was, especially the larger enterprises, there was a focus around security over user experience. And I think during COVID, we really prioritized user experience. So, I think I must have done about 50 Zoom webinars, fireside chats, whatever last year. And there were sort of three evolutions in terms of the security risk. The first one was really around compliance and governance issues. Early in COVID, people posting pictures of Post-it notes on Instagram with hashtag work from home, with sensitive data lying around everywhere. So because people are not used to that work from home etiquette, right? And then the second one was really around many organizations had, we're going to talk about VPN more later, I'm sure. Typically, the large enterprises tend to spec out around 8 to 10% remote workforce. And all of a sudden, everybody working remotely means the VPNs were catching on fire. And they just couldn't keep up. And so what they had to do was they had to send part of the traffic out to the cloud directly. So if you're going to YouTube, don't VPN to corporate, go direct. And the moment you go direct, there's all sorts of security issues because typically large enterprise, Global 2000 enterprise security tends to be in their own data center. And now if you're going direct to internet from your iPad, laptop, who's watching over you? So I think those are sort of how we saw the evolution happen. Of course, there's solutions we can talk about later.
Excellent. Travis, the idea of the technologies Kaushik just mentioned, VPNs and other technologies that organizations were using that maybe were not set up or designed for hundreds or maybe even thousands of users. all using at the same time. VPNs, that's basically what I'm thinking about most, but I know that there are other technologies out there as well that just were not designed for as much use as they've seen. What do you see as kind of the security implications of using those technologies, and is there a better way?
Yeah, I think, at Teleport, we don't have a VPN at all. And naturally, we use our own product to access our most sensitive infrastructure, our servers and databases and the applications. So I think, the way, and even at Airbnb, we were working on a project to un-VPN things. And I think a while back, we had launched Jira Data Center, inside of our network. It was so much faster, and we were expecting to see our employee satisfaction scores go way up. But they actually went way down. And the reason was, before we could access Jira without the VPN, now we have to use the VPN. And we were so shocked. We're like, wow, this wrecked our employee experience score after doing a huge implementation. And later we swapped it to Google Identity Aware Proxy. And suddenly people were so happy again, because those, I'm glad Kausik brought it up, the employee experience here of, doing things when you're working from home, these little employee experience nags can add up. So suddenly you're like, wow, it's so annoying that I have to do this again and again and again throughout the day. And I think, again and again on our employee satisfaction things, we saw VPN was one of the big headaches that people had. And, suddenly when we made, Jira was the great example of, like, when we put that under Google IP and suddenly it worked just like any other SaaS app, that's what people were used to. And I think we have to reach those expectations of the employees that they want the corporate internet to feel more like the consumer internet of, like, I can just go here. I don't need to worry about security. I don't need to remember to log into this first, that first. And I think, that's the experience we're really hoping to provide at Teleport, even for the most, sensitive things of accessing the production servers.
All right, Jeffrey, you're awfully quiet.
I know. You know me. I usually jump in, but I'm we're letting people talk.
Okay. All right. So, but so you're actually a good part of your company is actually based in Israel. So,
Yes.
how has that kind of? I mean, obviously, I don't know if you work remotely even pre-pandemic, or if you guys had an office in Boston, but have you noticed any difference between the way you work with organizations or with your home office, if you will, during the pandemic? Has that been kind of impacted, and what are some of the things that you guys have done from a security perspective to make sure that your communications are kind of locked down, if you will?
Sure. It's actually funny. I'll bring in another aspect of the security risk that's actually not technical. Almost immediately when the pandemic hit, most of us were used to working remotely or quasi-remotely anyways, because we're spread across the globe. And basically the second the pandemic hit and everybody started working remotely, we started getting hit by a lot of phishing emails. And I mean a lot. So, at one point, one of the DevOps guys, an email went out to the whole company from, some phishing place. And I think he said he got like 50 reports. So good on us for educating and training our people. But it's a major security hole that actually it really depends a lot on just education of having people understand not to click on that email and enter their password just because it says they need to sign into something. And it's a very non-technical aspect, but I think it's an important one, because it's it's so low tech, it's easy. People don't know who to trust or when. And the things that we use to identify ourselves, passwords and otherwise, don't always, you have to make sure you know your trust environment. And those phishing attacks, especially as time went on, got a little bit sophisticated. I don't mind. I almost fell for one. If I hadn't checked, I might have. I don't know if that says something about me or them, but but fundamentally, there's a lot of non-technical security risk in the world of remote work as well. And the other one I'll throw in there is, even inside your own company, knowing who's on which webinar and what you can disclose and share with who actually became a bigger issue for us when everybody's remote and everything is done on webinar. There was no more of those sidebars in a conference room. So you have to always know who you're on with even internally, just to make sure you're not sharing sensitive information for people who shouldn't have it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think those are all, really good points that both Travis and Jeffrey brought up, that, relying on basically non-technical things, right? You've got your employees out there and trying to help them, because they're not always thinking about security front of mind. You hope they are, but they aren't always. And definitely, like in the contact center industry, the idea of sending these contact center agents home is a really huge challenge, because those agents have access to all sorts of information that normally you would control in a controlled environment in a contact center, and now you send them home and they're in their living room with anybody being able to see that. And so a lot of these contact centers are really challenged with that. And how do we allow these folks to do their job and have the information they need without having them expose or be exposed to more than they need? And that's really driven a lot of conversation with our customers over this past year.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring up the idea of the compliance issues that are around a lot of this work from home, because again, it's not really high on a lot of organizations' priority lists when they send their employees home. Are we, Justin, especially in the contact center industry, when you do have a lot of sensitive information that is accessed by contact center agents, have any of your customers experienced any kind of issues regarding compliance and meeting a lot of those regulatory compliance,
right,
between GDPR and CCPR, all of the state and federal and even the European regulations. What are companies doing to meet those compliance rules and regulations that are out there, and has that changed?
Kind of spreads the gamut. I mean, a lot of them just feel like they're caught between a rock and a hard place. They're having to bring the agents in because they can't control the physical environment. That's one key aspect of some of these regulations, like PCI, is controlling that physical environment. So they've really been challenged with this. Some of them, are just taking the chance and hoping for the best. But that's really a dangerous game to play, because there is all sorts of information that they have access to. And so a lot of these companies are looking for ways to, do I really need that information? It really makes you kind of think through what information does, say, an agent in a contact center actually need to perform their job, and are there other ways to do some of those things without them being exposed? And that's kind of a key thing of, if you don't have the data, then, or it's not being sent out to somebody sitting in their living room or in a home office, if you don't really need to send it to them, then you need to find ways to mask it, tokenize it, those kind of things.
Okay. Pete, I want to bring you into the conversation also. What are you guys hearing from your clients, from your customers, about some of the things that they've experienced since the onset of the pandemic, either from a data breach perspective or from other security issues that they just haven't been able to maybe manage on their own, that actually could kind of come back to bite them?
Thanks, Charlene. I mean, I think the panelists here all picked up on valid places, right, in the environment that have faced a challenge this year. Tausig, I mean, just started with the attack surface has grown exponentially, right, with millions of people working from home on personal devices. In some cases, we prioritize productivity over security in a lot of cases, right? A hospital's job is to cure patients and to protect people, not necessarily to secure data, even though they're a regulated industry. So the growth of the attack surface has really been a challenge for chief security officers and CTOs. They don't want to hamper productivity workers, but they also know that the threat actors have really loved what they've seen, because they've seen all of these new remote devices and bring your own devices as potential attack points, right, and threat entry points. What we see, and of course, Dell Technologies is an enormous organization with a lot of different solutions. I tend to work in the area of the business that looks at protecting customers' most critical data. So not all data is created equally. If you're the victim of a ransomware attack or a sophisticated cyber attack, and your production and backup environment is gone, what do you need first to bring that back up? So whether you want to look at Garmin or SolarWinds or the NotPetya attack a few years ago, incident response has really, I've seen a rise in a lot of organizations asking about and preparing for cyber incident response. Because the bad actors only have to be successful once to get in, right? Are these end users and all of our customers have to be perfect? And I don't think there's any such thing as 100% preventing a cyber attack. It's what you're going to do after and how you're going to recover that matters.
Do you mind if I just jump in on that one? Because one thing that I've heard quite a lot of people say is that they were not prepared for the, let's just say, rush to remote work. In a lot of geographies, it was instant. Everybody's remote. And one thing that I keep hearing over and over is we're not any better prepared now. We haven't had any issues, so we haven't invested in closing all those gaps. They sort of left the door open and then nobody came through it, so they aren't prioritizing locking that door. Are you guys seeing the same thing?
Was that to me, Jeffrey? Because
sorry.
And everybody, I think you're absolutely right, Jeffrey. So I saw, if you go back a year ago and even a little bit earlier to March of 2020, those first 3 months of the pandemic, people moved, as you said, very rapidly. And I think in some cases we saw 2 to 3 years of transformation in a few months, of people refreshing their infrastructure, arming their workforces to work at home and be productive. And you're right, that security often fell by the wayside in the wake of being productive and keeping the lights on. And everybody's so busy they didn't go back to look at, close the back door afterwards. So I think in many cases those holes are still there. I agree with you.
I'd concur with that. I think we run into a lot of customers who, frankly, were educating or evangelizing about the fact that, yes, you had to do this, and, everybody responded quickly to what was an unprecedented situation, but, you do have to go back and I like that analogy of close the back door. And, we spend just as much time evangelizing about that as we do having customers come to us who realize it. But there's a lot of them out there who just don't and need to be made aware.
Could I what about those something Justin said? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Sorry.
That's all right. Go ahead.
Just earlier about regulated industries. So the irony is that heavily regulated industries like financial services and healthcare, right, are still at the top of the list of industries that get attacked by ransomware and cyber attacks. They're still the most frequently attacked. And I think a lot of that has to do with the value of the data. It isn't that the regulations are not on the books. In many cases, compliance, data protection, or immutability regulations are not being enforced. They're on the books, but if they're not enforced by the regulators, then these customers don't look at it as an investment, right? They look at it as more of an insurance policy. So being in a regulated industry isn't necessarily an antidote for avoiding security threats. In many cases, it's a target on your back.
Are you implying that unenforced regulations don't help anything? I'm shocked.
I think that's what I was implying.
Yeah. Everybody checks that box, and that's really nice. But yeah.
Well, that's one thing we talk to customers about a lot is, we did a lot with PCI, right? So, a lot of people look at it and say, okay, yeah, I've achieved PCI compliance, but that's not a one-time event, right? Those type of events are ongoing. You have to achieve it every day. And, to the point that was made earlier, you have to be perfect in that, whereas the bad actors only got to get it right once. So I think as more of these regulations come out, if you look at some of the fines that have been issued by GDPR, and as we see more of that grow here in the States, as California and others are taking on some of these regulations, I do think we'll start to see people actually take this frankly a little more seriously, because there will be some kind of teeth behind it. But it's a real challenge.
So what about digital transformation? I know a lot of organizations have kind of accelerated their digital transformation journeys, if you will, since the onset of the pandemic, because they realized that they really need to up their user experience, their customer experience, and also invest in their infrastructure to be able to handle the long-term implications of work from home. But do you think that security has been as big a part of the conversation in their digital transformation efforts as perhaps they should be? Anybody who wants to join?
I mean, absolutely, right? I think if you, at least from where we cater to our customers, we see employees kind of doing three simple things. They want to go to the internet to do their job. They want to access various SaaS applications. And every now and then they want to turn around and access internal applications. I think Travis mentioned Jira. I mean, end of the day, it's all about internet connectivity. And one of the big challenges has been traditional security model has been around racking and stacking 20 layers of security in their own data center and managing it. And it's like Swiss cheese. It doesn't matter how many layers you put in there, stuff just keeps coming in. And so the move to the digital transformation is not just moving applications from internal and workloads from internal to the cloud, but the moment you do that, security model breaks down. You go from a hub and spoke model to everybody accessing everything from everywhere. And so really what needs to happen, and it is actually happening, is that cloud security the security needs to move to the cloud. So that way, no matter what you're accessing, whether it's the internet or SaaS applications or turning around and using like a VPN replacement zero trust model to access internal applications, you get consistent security no matter what device. It doesn't matter where you are and what you're trying to access.
Yeah, I think
I think there's a challenge there too. Yeah, go ahead, Travis.
Oh yeah. So I was at Deloitte on the digital transformation team, and we saw a lot of these companies move. And I think the hardest part is, I think they're all very aware of the security problems, but is that when you're in that 1 foot in and 1 foot out, when you still have a lot of things, legacy applications and data center, you're trying to bridge that gap. And you're not quite fully in the cloud. You haven't moved a lot of your security into the cloud. You haven't changed to a Beyond Corp model. That 1 foot in and 1 foot out, I think, is the toughest place to be in, because I think it's a bad user experience, and you have your attack surface suddenly becomes gigantic. That you have a data center, you might be in Azure and GCP and AWS, and you got these SaaS apps. So suddenly, we went from a small team that was maybe managing all the on-prem networks of a handful of engineers to now we need specialists who have to cover this huge attack surface. And once you break through, or maybe you're a startup like we are, we have the luxury of never having to have that weight of older industry. But I think that's the toughest place to be in, is when you're in that transition. I think now we've kind of forced people's hands of they have to do it quickly, and when you do things quickly, that's when the mistakes get made, and that's where I think we're going to see a lot more breaches if people aren't careful of trying to rush to the cloud as quick as possible.
Right.
Stitching all that together and maintaining actual user access control and making sure all those configs work together, and you're not just leaving one tiny door open on one service off to the side, is a nightmare. It's just
and especially
reality.
when there's a shared security model, right? One of the cloud is wonderful, and now we're looking at multi-cloud, right? So with multiple data centers, data sets around the globe, it's a boon to productivity and flexibility and maybe cost. But in the opposite sense, to Travis's point, look at all that threat surface is enormous. How do you control and protect consistently data that's on premise in multiple clouds, and really you don't know where, when those cloud providers don't own that responsibility? You still own the responsibility to protect that data. And
that's
I don't know that a lot of organizations might not recognize that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's really a good point, because that's huge for us, is that we see a lot of people moving to the cloud, but there's this false sense of security even by saying, well, my cloud provider handles all that for me. And to your point, it's really a shared responsibility, and people need to understand that just because a cloud provider may say that they offer a certain level of security, you're still accessing that. So as data leaves their infrastructure and comes into your users and that kind of stuff, there's still that attack surface as well. So it's I think in some ways there can be a false sense of security by leveraging the cloud.
Yeah, short story. I was evaluating a vendor just for our own use the other day, and I just asked the questions about security you normally would ask, and I was told the answer that just made me cringe, and I bothered to explain to them why it made me cringe, which is, oh, yeah, we don't have that certification. I can't remember which one I was asking about, one of the ISO ones. And they said, oh, we don't have that because AWS, we use AWS, so we're fine. And I was like, wow, I really don't trust your security now.
I've heard this one too.
Yeah, I think that supply chain security has never more important. I think, you know, in the last 9 months or so, you know, the SolarWinds hack, I think was one of those manifestations where, you know, again, for who we are and the customers that we serve, the Global 2000 plus now the, you know, Department of Defense, it's not enough for our product to be secure. It's not enough that our employees are ISO 86001 compliant. It's also every other piece of software that we use, whether it's open source or other vendors, whether it's running in our own, you know, VPCs, or we're using other SaaS services. That security model has to continue, and we need to hold everybody else accountable that, you know, that are serving us, as much as our customers hold us responsible for serving them. Right. So the security model. I mean, Jeffrey, yeah, that's a very valid point. Just because you're in Amazon or the cloud doesn't mean you have to not worry about it, right?
Come on, I didn't ask if AWS was secure. I'm pretty sure they are. I was asking if you were.
Right.
By the way, it's somebody, we've danced around the geopolitical stuff a little bit, but I think the other big impact is the pandemic has exacerbated the geopolitical communication a lot, which was already kind of strange with GDPR and different protections in different places. But one thing I've definitely noticed is being able to be not only compliant in multiple countries, but being able to trace information through multiple countries has been quite a pain, just to go off of what Linda put in the chat there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And if you have a comment for any of the panelists, you too can use the chat and go ahead and submit it. And yeah, it's really kind of fascinating to see how you know, how actually, I don't even think I should use the word fascinating. I think it's kind of disturbing how some companies really kind of took a lackadaisical approach to security and kind of made it somebody else's responsibility. And that has kind of you know, become a major issue with remote work and the pandemic. You know, if we think about, you know, supply chain security is a huge thing, and to your point, Kaushik, the SolarWinds hack really put a spotlight on that, and that's something that was kind of growing pre-pandemic. But you know, but I have to wonder if there were certain types of companies that actually kind of have fared better during the pandemic than others when it comes to cybersecurity. You know, what are some of the, you know, I don't know if we could kind of, you know, maybe create a profile, if you will, of companies that have done better from a cybersecurity standpoint than other companies. You know, what would be some of the things that you would, you know, that you guys would say would kind of characterize those companies that are doing cybersecurity well, if you will?
Yeah, I'll jump on that. I mean, it is those companies that are taking that seriously, and I kind of touched on this earlier. They've really done an evaluation of, is there a way to continue to provide the service that we do, continue to provide the user experience that we do, but not actually have to have the data exposed all the way through? And are there areas where, you know, we can still, you know, a lot of what we deal with is either financial transactions, that kind of stuff, or some sort of verification thing, collecting social security numbers, that kind of stuff. And so if there's a way to still achieve that while not having to expose that to all of the end users and end devices and that kind of stuff, then that's really the way to do it. And it's kind of a phrase we use. If you don't have the data, then, you know, if somebody gets in, there's no data to be had. So the companies that are really taking a look at and really mapping out the data elements that they deal with, how those data elements flow through all of the different environments and where they're actually needed. You know, we've had several, you know, of the Fortune 50 companies really take a look at that and be serious about that. And we're starting to see more and more companies do it. I mean, the pandemic has raised some awareness of that. So,
Travis, cloud native. Do you think that that has an impact, either positive or negative, on cybersecurity? Whether a company is kind of more in the cloud native realm than the traditional on-premises or legacy type IT infrastructures, or what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I think the cloud native companies have an advantage of being a lot lighter weight, of not having to deal with the weight of that infrastructure, which carries a lot of difficult responsibilities. I think the downside, though, is that, you know, as we talked about, a lot of companies are just assuming SaaS apps are safe, and you know, with the worry of the supply chain attacks, you know, we're evaluating our supply chain of how can we bring, you know, over time each of those SaaS apps in, and you know, I think a lot of mid-sized startups haven't yet invested. So a lot of cloud native companies maybe haven't invested in a lot of the security infrastructure that they should be, of a security and information events monitoring. You know, I think you have to be a certain size company to even look at that, to have like the infrastructure needed to actually scan and collect all the events that are happening on your SaaS apps to even know that something bad happened. So I think, you know, cloud native will, I think, you know, as we've seen, it gets you moving fast. But you still have some of the exact same challenges you would. And I think some are even harder. I think, you know, when you have everything running on your data center, some things like logging are much easier. And actually logging all of your SaaS apps, they all work so differently. It can be a really hard problem. So I think for a lot of cloud native companies, I think the issue is that they have less control. They don't get to see under the hood of these apps that they're connected to. They have to kind of trust them based on compliance reports. And then a lot of times we have no way to verify that trust either, that maybe we can log, we can look at little signals that something weird is happening. So I think you really have to, I think Justin put it great, of being like, we say the same thing of like with passwords of, you know, if you can't access the data, then there's no data to breach, that you have strong role-based access control. Same with passwords. If there's no password to steal, you can't get in. And I think, you know, we have to be very cognizant of which things you're allowing to go on the cloud. So I think we're having a moment now where we're looking at, you know, how much of our supply chain can we pull inside our cloud, which of course gives its own access challenges of dealing with that, of how can somebody over in Canada access our Jenkins system, and then maybe they flew to see their family in Germany, and now we see a new IP from Germany coming, and they're accessing Jenkins and are you know, one of our build tools. So I think there's a lot of challenges, and you know, the cloud native companies are maybe just blissfully unaware of the security problems, as so many of us have put it.
There was a good analogy I heard called the second home analogy, right? And so if you think about the idea of, you know, if you're fortunate enough to be able to afford a vacation home or something, that's great, but you still have to go in, you have to furnish that home, you have to set up utilities for that home, you have to pay for all that kind of stuff. And cloud native is kind of the same way. You can move all that stuff out of your data center into the cloud, but you still have to set up all of the things you would even in your data center around that, especially around security. So just like you were talking about, Travis. And so I think that's, again, goes to this idea, I think that's been a theme throughout this a little bit, is just because you move to the cloud doesn't mean you're automatically secure, that, you know, you can outsource the security to that cloud provider.
And actually I could share with our clients, you know, again, we're focused mainly on open source. So cloud native and more modern architectures, almost by definition, use open source much more heavily than legacy systems. So that now introduces a dependency management piece and keeping things up to date. And I am daily shocked how many people have known vulnerabilities just sitting in their infrastructure because they don't keep everything up to date.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two companies that did reasonably, two types of companies that did well. I think Travis talked a lot about the cloud native companies, but they also took the time to make sure that things like two-factor authentication, and all of that stuff was set up right in the right way, and looking at data movement and how do we actually monitor these tools and so on and so forth. And the flip side of that is companies that are severely limiting productivity for the sake of security, in terms of really blocking websites and only allowing corporate sanctioned devices, and they had the VPN infrastructure already set up to support all of that stuff. I think they did reasonably well. As much as we can argue about, everybody needs to move to the cloud because that's the right way to do it, is I think some of those companies, also simple things like disaster recovery. One of the big things, I think I was in one panel, they were like, the first thing that I did was I went and printed out some, access code or whatever, because now all of a sudden we're going home and we can't even access anything. We don't know if the VPN is going to stay up. And so just little things like that people are not even thinking about, right? And so I think there's two types of companies. One, those are already were strictly locked down, and everything was forced to go to the corporate. VPNs already were scaled out. And then the other one, of course, is all the stuff that Travis talked about.
I think one of the things, we just to sort of bring it up a little bit, one level, one of the things we've seen with successful companies is a cultural shift, right? And it's both the business and the IT leadership and really the board understanding that data drives their business, whatever business they're in. If they manufacture cars, if they sell cars, whatever, if they're a hospital or government, data is their business. And then starting from a point of, and I think Kaushik is maybe touching on this, a point of recovery. Let's, don't assume that our prevention is going to be perfect. What happens if we are attacked? And I think that cultural shift, once that happens, makes it much easier for the IT leadership in those companies to make the right decisions around security first, data first, and we're going to practice recovery, right? No matter how prepared you are for a cyber attack, when it happens, it's absolutely chaos. And so really being a practitioner of recovering and planning for that, and not necessarily disaster recovery. I think that's in many cases important, but it's a little bit outdated for cyber attacks for the modern threat. So data-centric and a recovery sort of perspective is a good way to start.
All right, well, time is flying. So we are about 13 minutes to the top of the hour. So, and we've been talking a lot about the challenges, but I'd like to get to the opportunities here. Otherwise, we're only providing half a webinar. So want to take a look at maybe what are some of the ways that organizations can really capitalize on what's happened from a security perspective during a pandemic to, where they can find opportunities here, whether it's internal, helping their employees become more cyber aware, helping them practice better cyber hygiene, or whether it's external, whether it's helping protect their end users, from maybe a different point of view or different methodology. But I'd like to hear from you guys. How do you think that organizations can find opportunity here in what could be a very bad situation? Jeffrey, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think honestly, there's a lot of opportunity, especially for all of us who are selling security solutions.
Well, sure.
But look, fundamentally, all this really did is accelerate the change that was going to happen anyways. And in a lot of ways, that's a positive. It forced attention on an issue. We were all moving towards remote work slowly in any case. One thing I am 100% certain of is we basically just jumped it ahead 5 years. It's not like we created a different problem. That created a lot of awareness. There's a lot more people actually concerned about it. A lot of companies, pretty much every single one, is how do I handle my data? How do I make sure it's secure? I think this was a bigger change than the implementation of GDPR, which I lived through as a CIPM. And so that's saying something. I think the focus and the understanding and the adoption of a more cloud-based world for every aspect has really highlighted the need for security. And I think that's nothing but a positive. There's challenges in how to do it, but the fact that there's a will and a desire to do it is always the first step anyways.
All right.
Sorry, I got all like philosophical on that one, but okay.
Well, no, I think you're right. Look, there's never a shortage of technology, right? There's never a shortage of solutions and products and services. I think in many cases, this is a cultural shift. When companies start to put security first and see security and data protection as a competitive advantage, I think that's when we'll see a change. There was a quote that the chairman of Merck made. If you go back a little bit, the NotPetya attack. Merck, which is a global company, shipping and logistics, was out of business. They could not operate for several weeks. They were able to recover. And after that happened, the chairman spoke at a financial summit, and he said at the time, we now see security and data protection and recovery as a competitive advantage. I think that's sort of the shift that we're talking about, maybe.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It is the culture thing, and we talk with our customers, and we've had some feedback even from our customers that their end customers that they're talking to on the phone, when they utilize our service, really appreciate that, and it does become a competitive advantage. The public is interested in making sure that their stuff is secure. They're aware of it for sure, and so if they have a choice between two companies that are on some level equal, if this company is going to pay more attention to the security of my data, I'm probably going to go with them a little bit. And so security becoming, like you said, Pete, an advantage and a differentiator is a huge cultural shift, because in the past, it was brought up earlier that it's just viewed as an insurance policy and there's no ROI on it, and it's just that kind of stuff. And so the companies that really see security as a part of their culture and as a competitive advantage, I think are the ones that are really going to make headway.
Just to add on. Oh,
go ahead, Travis.
Just to add on to what you say, I think that advantage of, if you have good security and you can have workers all over the world, that is a business advantage like no other. That you can now hire people from anywhere in the world. It's a huge talent. You can expand your market, and if we are in a more uncertain world, being in multiple countries, being in multiple areas, like it insulates you from a lot of this DR of your servers. Like, we all put our servers in multiple areas, but that week with the fires in San Francisco, our productivity was through the floor. Having a globally distributed workforce is a huge competitive advantage. It allows you to hire the best around the world, but you can't do that unless you've first kind of gone through these security hurdles of securing your company, being your infrastructure is distributed and can hold that. And it's that journey's worth it. And I think I'm excited that maybe now companies will see that investing in this is a huge business advantage for the company.
Yeah, I have a slightly different take on a lot of this, which is, if you go back and look at security software in the last 20 years, the only thing that we've ever built that worked conclusively was the basic firewall, where you can allow or block. And then from there, we started down the slippery slope, where in an effort to protect businesses, we really started compromising productivity, right? And then more and more and more, and it's been just one thing building on top of the other. So instead of questioning, why do I have 20 layers of security, which are generating so many alerts, instead we should think about software that doesn't generate alerts. Now we end up building more advanced SIMs that use AI and ML and all of that stuff. So, I mean, there's a lot of development community that you guys talk to from a security boulevard, right? I think in the developer world, there's a saying that you have two problems, and you realize you have one problem, and you realize you can solve that with regular expression. Now we've got two problems, and so that's the journey that we've been on. So in some ways, there's a longing almost to have security software that doesn't call for attention. Just stay in the background, do your job, and just make that productivity. Don't compromise user experience against security. And then, phishing is, I think, Jeffrey, you mentioned early on, phishing being a training thing. To me, that's a classic example where, as an employee, if I go into work, everything else is controlled by the administrators and the security personnel, whether it's scanning documents, whether it's making sure the website is blocked, etc. But what I can click on is up to me to decide. Because there's no software that's being built, right? So now we have this sort of strange mix where employees can take for granted certain things about certain, security of certain things, But then when it comes to opening links, they have to like all of a sudden become the cybersecurity expert. So really, I think there's
Yes.
this push for cybersecurity software just staying in the background, just working as, just in the background and doing its job so people can do whatever they need to do.
Yeah, so there are so many other ways that we could, other things related to cybersecurity that we could discuss. I mean, we didn't even touch on, from a software development perspective, implementing DevOps and DevSecOps and having that as part of the software development lifecycle. We have a question from Kelvin, who asks, one of the aspects of secure products, which are common criteria certified, is ensuring that the development environment itself is highly regulated, controlled, and secured. Seeing as many more personnel in the development environment, e.g. software engineers, QA testers, et cetera, are now working remotely, how can product development companies and product certification schemes adapt to accommodate this new reality? That is a great question, Kelvin. And I'm not sure, it's one that a lot of organizations have really put a lot of thought into. Jeffrey, you are working a lot with developers. So are you, Kausik, and would love to hear from your perspective, how this issue can be resolved.
It's funny. So the issue of standardization and security practices is one heck of a big subject.
Yeah.
But I actually don't view it all that differently from something Justin said, which is, PCI compliance, as an example, has a physical environment capabilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Certain requirements are there. A lot of our standards are going to have to change and adapt, whether they're common criteria or PCI, to a remote first world. Because I think one thing that's actually become very clear, to go off something Travis said, is that remote first is a business advantage, which means security concerns aside, privacy concerns aside, those will all have to get solved because the business leads. And remote first is a big business advantage. If I don't need to hire somebody in the Valley, I can hire somebody a lot less expensive in Texas or Ohio. And that's a huge advantage for me. So I think fundamentally these standards are going to have to adapt or they'll get thrown out.
Yeah, we at Menlo, we are ISO 8601 certified, and I think as many of you have mentioned, right, certification is not a one-time thing. It's really around adopting sort of a methodology where you're doing this continuous assessment and you're looking at the risk and you're making everybody aware and also have ownership where, the IT now becomes an enabler and a supporter. It's not like they're solving all the security problems for you. Right. So little things like, having the screensaver lock after a minute after you're away, or not putting Post-it notes with credentials and taking Instagram pictures and, going viral with that. Just all of that stuff, now collectively as a company, it matters that we take care of the company and each other as much as the products that we build that can help the customers.
Yeah, if I could interject on Kelvin's question, I think
Sure.
on how to secure the dev environment, I think again, like Justin said, if there's no data, if you don't have access to data, you can't leak the data.
Mm-hmm.
Is kind of pushing those development environments into the cloud earlier. That you have dev, stage, QA all in the cloud, and maybe what you're doing with local development on your laptop is you don't have access to the data sets. You can't download them. You're only using mocking and like test data sets that are on your laptop. So if your laptop gets lost, we don't worry because you were never able to get those data sets. They always lived in the cloud. And if we saw you trying to download them, that's going to throw off some red flags. So I think kind of embracing that, get your dev environments into the cloud quicker, and don't let people be developing with secure data on their laptops. It's they should be using testing and mock data to begin with.
I saw somebody using a test data set that was literally a copy of their production and on their local computer the other day in a screensaver session. I immediately was like, you need to stop sharing your screen and please don't do that. It wasn't one of our employees. It was a vendor actually, but yeah.
Wow. Well, guys, hey, we have 1 minute to the end of the webinar. Time flies when you're having fun. So we could go on for at least another hour, I'm sure. But I do want to thank everybody for your insights. That's great conversation. And I'm sure we'll be having a lot more conversations like this on Security Boulevard. So, invite everybody to kind of join in the conversation there. Real quick, just a reminder that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on demand. And the webinar is also going to be on the Security Boulevard website, so you can go look for it there. And before we close things out, I did mention that we would be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So let's do that now. Our winners today are Dave B. Congratulations, Dave. Carlos M. Congratulations, Carlos. Trisha P. Congratulations, Trisha. And finally, Tom L. Congratulations, Tom. We'll be following up with all 4 of you via email to get your gift card over to you. So check your inbox. Pete, Jeffrey, Travis, Justin, and Kausik, thank you all for your insights, for your expertise, for the conversation today. It was great. I really enjoyed it. I hope the audience got a lot out of it. Good stuff all the way around. And again, thanks for your time. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Bye,
to be here.
everybody.
Bye,
I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm now signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.